Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Milton Hernandez, Director of Industry Insights and Community for Informal Markets Fashion, which produces leading fashion trade events like Magic, Coterie, Project, and Sourcing at Magic. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time today, our content and marketing teams here at Informal Markets Fashion host and produce these digital sessions regularly with the goal to bring the larger fashion community key insights, market trends, inspirations, and vital information you need. So we are very excited to have you join us for what is sure to be an inspiring session on fashion trends. Today, we will hear from Brian Trenzo, Head of Brand at Informal Markets Fashion, joined by Sarah Maggiani, Head of Women's Wear at WGSN, and Noah Zager, WGSN's Senior North America Menswear Strategist. Brian, Sarah, and Noah will discuss the key Spring-Summer 2022 trends for several markets, including menswear, contemporary women's wear, and youth-driven trends in women's fashion. At the end of the session, we will have a live Q&A with our experts, so please be sure to stick around and jot down your questions during the presentation. We'll get started shortly, but first, I'll review a few housekeeping items for everyone.
Chris.
Please note you will be placed on mute for the duration of the call. All questions will be addressed via the Q&A log or at the end of the presentation. 2, please close all other browsers while viewing the webinar to help with the quality of your connection. If you experience any system issues, click on the Q&A widget down below. And lastly, a recording of the presentation will be emailed to you in the next few days, and you can also access the full trend toolkit for each market, which cover all the micro and macro trends that will be discussed today. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Brian Trenzo. Brian, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Just making sure I wasn't on mute because I have a habit of doing so. So I will serve as an overview here, introducing Team WGSN, what they're about to present to you, which comes under their trend toolkit. So hereby, there is an overview of how we get from consumer drivers to the absolute must-haves and the trends at the hero brands on the informal markets trade show floors, both physically and digitally. So starting with the consumer drivers, really looking at the data and nuggets of information that form the foundation upon which some of the more detailed and story-driven observations are made. Speaking of those story-driven observations, Noah and Sarah will move us into the trend narratives, whereby they will explore how the consumer drivers are applied against that which is happening in the culture, if you will, or the zeitgeist. From there, they will present the big ideas, which are the key narratives, really specific fashion concepts that emerge as these big ideas driving the design and merchandising of each cohort. So men's, women's contemporary, and women's trend. From there, we'll look at the seasonal must-have, those key items, and work through the trend checklist and tie it all back to how you can be educated and discover at each of Coterie, Magic, and Project. So without further ado, I hand it over to Noah.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good trade show. Yeah, so I'm just going to take you through the men's trend toolkit. And, as Brian stated, we'll start by taking a quick look at the consumer drivers. You'll notice in the top it says joyful expressions, and I think that's something you're going to be hearing a lot through all of this. And really what it comes down to is this idea that, out of more challenging times, we tend to respond with excitement and levity. You can think of the Roaring '20s as a response to the 1918 flu and that sort of thing. So, we've been talking about in the past a lot of how things are challenging and how do we respond to the pandemic while within it. And now we're sort of talking about what's going to happen as we emerge from it and what are the attitudes of people. And you can see this, in some of these statistics here. So there's been an increase in digital detox, and people are starting to want to travel again and see the world because they've been sort of locked up. Another one to take a look at would be internet aesthetics. As we've spent more and more time online, the line between what we wear in the real world and what our avatars in video games wear and how that sort of goes back and forth is really influencing things. Very simply, we're looking at lots of joyful prints, a lot of geometric patterns, and you can see a huge uptick in those. And then something to always keep in mind is sustainability and ethical and responsible fashion. And, the drive to use organic materials has really increased significantly in recent times. So moving forward, well, this is a quote from me. So I'll summarize it quickly for you guys. And essentially it says that we've had time on our hands to sort of do some self-exploration. And now as men in this world, we're looking to express ourselves, and we're a bit more comfortable with that. And that could be very living out loud and bright, or it could be a bit more of a spiritual awakening and a little bit closer to home and a bit more personal. But regardless, it's about expressing things like joy and excitement and interest. And so we land on the trend narrative, which is this joyful expression. And really, we do have it split into two parts. One is the living out loud side, which is the response to being locked up. You want to come out now and party and celebrate and live, big. And the other is more about introspective searching and finding joy from within. So you're looking at mindful practices and meditation and things like that. All really important to look at as we move forward and kind of predict what this world is going to be like as we reemerge. So here's the big ideas, and these are essentially these big trends that we're looking at. First up is your urban gardener. For the last several seasons, we've been seeing so much outdoors gear, technical hiking stuff, waterproof this, and, breathable materials that. And, one of the themes that came from that was sort of combating nature, right? Like, this hiking gear is designed to protect you from nature, protect you from the elements. But I think going forward, there's going to be a subtle shift, and that's going to be more about embracing nature and living within it. And, that's that spiritual side. And so gardening is sort of a representation of that. And you're going to see this in more organic prints, less overt technology, woven sort of organic looking handmade details, but with an eye towards nature. I think Brian has a couple things to say about this as well.
Yeah, Noah, over the years, you and I have discussed many trends that have led up to this point. Normcore, Gorbcore, to use some of the cores. So during the pandemic, it's no wonder that some of those styles of more muted colors that play into regular guy dressing, so in this case, a regular urban gardener, if you will. So it would make sense that this trend sort of emerges from there. And I would just call out paying attention to other sedentary, mindful activities, whether it's chess, pottery, climbing, as being very influential in the menswear space this season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, gardening is just sort of like an overarching idea here, but it definitely applies in so many different ways. So next is the smart comfort seeker. And this is more for the guy who really got used to being very comfortable during the pandemic and now has to return into the world, but doesn't really want to sacrifice what they've gotten used to. So it's a way to kind of merge comfort with a smarter, dressier aesthetic that's ready to be outdoors in an urban environment. So think about, dress pants with an elastic waistband, slightly looser, more flowing cuts, as we've seen silhouettes get looser and a little less tailored in recent times. It's a great way to still have refined looks that are nice and comfortable. And yeah, I've spoken a lot to people outside in the world, and one of the big questions is, what are we going to do after the pandemic? And I think what it comes down to is men who never cared about getting dressed aren't going to suddenly start caring about getting dressed now that the pandemic is over, but they will want to maintain that comfort. Whereas guys who like to get dressed really want to get dressed now because there's a reason to sort of, celebrate, and things have been locked in your closet for a year. So it's time to sort of be bigger than life. Now we have the hedonist, which is certainly a representation of bigger than life. Something that's really emerged in men's fashion over the last few years is the importance of resort wear, not just for the resort, but as a sort of defining factor of a lot of styles. And this is going to show in these bold, loud prints, lots of color, tropical, upbeat. Something really interesting has been matching sets that we've seen a lot of for men as of late. So the resort shirt paired with a short in a matching print. Some brands are doing that really, really well. You can always turn to guys like Dries Van Noten, who's been an incredible sort of purveyor of prints for years and these big, bright, loud looks. And that's just going to keep continuing. So next up is the Country Clubber. Both at the directional sort of catwalk level and at retail, prep has been such a driving force within the men's market. These classic nostalgic ideas around sort of affluence and comfortable living work on both a level of honest sort of wanting to, live in that sort of lifestyle, and also on a youth level of subverting those ideas. And so both directions can be played with depending on your consumer. From a trend perspective, it's the cable knit sweaters, it's color blocked sailing prints, it's the continuation of polo shirts and rugby shirts. Really things that are, part of that world. I think something interesting to point out is a bit of this retro tinge to it. We're seeing a lot of that, and one of the aesthetics that kind of emerged out of that was a bit of this washed pastel country club 90s Miami Vice meets laying on by a pool sort of thing. So think those like faded pinks and beautiful turquoise kind of colors mixed in with some of the more collegiate and academic preppy tropes. Brian, did you want to add something over here?
Yeah, I think it's just so interesting how coming out of the pandemic, to use that word comfort that you brought up earlier, how consumers are looking at styles that they're comfortable with, right? And most men, whether they are style mavens in their own right or the average consumer, are comfortable with the idea of prep, having seen it for the last 100 years, right? So it's no wonder that these country club prep-driven styles would be subverted at this time and that people would go back to it for inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we really are, talking about comfort. And a big theme from last season, too, was how nostalgia is a form of comfort. It's safety in the familiar. And it's a great point that continues forward. Going forward, we have the psychedelic, which it's your festival wear. It's the continuation of the tie-dye and sort of 1960s sort of hippie tropes. You can see it in patchwork, in craft, and all that kind of detail. But it's also a bit of 90s rave. It's not a single sort of anachronistic point of view. It's an amalgam of different eras where you've sort of celebrated this type of lifestyle. And there's a bit of future in it, too. So there's the spiritual aspect, there's the handmade aspect, there's the sort of neon and bright aspect. And this can appeal to a more sophisticated, mature audience, but there's really a lot of opportunity here for the festival market. And as festivals really do start to launch again, I mean, I know Lollapalooza and Pitchfork and some of the big American festivals are going off this year, without much of a hitch. So we need to start thinking about how to dress the younger generation for that sort of stuff. And this is a great way to look into that. Next up is your innovative minimalist. So similar to the Gardner, this is sort of a response to all the hyper-technical gear that we've seen in the world. And again, a lot of it was, I'm traveling to work, I have to go somewhere. How do I combat the world around me? How do I protect myself? And while we haven't lost an interest in that, the aesthetic of that has sort of faded away. So now what we're looking at is clothing that doesn't scream high-tech, but is actually stripped down and minimal and hides its technology. So within these sort of simplistic-looking garments, you have antibacterial and antimicrobial fabrics. You have sweat wicking. You have breathability. You have weather resistance, and all the kind of things that would allow you to wear this clothing no matter what life throws at you, but it doesn't look like you're sort of battling against anything. And I think that's really key here. It's not looking like you're battling. I love brands like Nanamika and Hollywood from Japan that both sort of play with this sort of tech-embedded clothing that doesn't look technical. And then, of course, you have Prada's Linea Rossa, which has been doing this for decades and has really launched back in recent years with a lot of influence. And last up is the Phygitalist. This is what we talked about at the beginning a little bit, which is how the digital virtual world and the real world are blending. You know, we spent a lot of time at home on our computers as of late, and we're seeing ways that we've used the digital world to sort of combat what's been going on. And this can be seen in, you know, the relevance of NFTs and insert, you know, the surge in Bitcoin and that sort of stuff. But we also see it with digital concerts or designers creating clothing specifically for virtual worlds. You know, Louis Vuitton doing a digital collection, Balenciaga using their, you know, when they couldn't put on a traditional runway show, creating essentially a video game to show off their clothing, right? And so that aesthetic is going to come across. And for a younger generation, this is really something that's not a foreign concept. It's not strange to think about. And I know for some of the, you know, the older generations, this seems completely new. But people who grew up on the internet and grew up with digital worlds, this has become sort of a seamless bridge between the two. And so you're going to see these neon colors, these traditional video game sort of designs and details in the clothing. You're going to see 3D knits, new technical innovations in the way you're constructing things, but also looking at ways that you can then return this back into the video game and the virtual worlds. So we're going to look at some of the must-have items here. Something to notice is a lot of these items appeal and apply to several of the categories. And so it's really going to be fundamental that buyers know their consumer and understand how to combine these items to create ranges that make sense for who they're selling to. So for instance, the premium hoodie really falls into almost every single category we're looking at, whether it's minimal or graphic driven or possibly in a different material like a open weave knit. All those are different ways of, you know, doing the premium hoodie that are going to appeal to different markets. The resort shirt too is going to continue to be a strong item in several categories. You're going to see the knits, and you can see some of the statistics here that really help point this out, right? Like abstract prints have increased. The pocket t-shirt has increased. Tropical motifs continue to increase and go up year over year. It's also important to look at some of the accessories and footwear, and something to notice is there are sneakers here and training shoes, but they're really limited to which trends they appeal to at this stage. And what we're seeing, especially for the warmer months, are a lot of sandals, mules, and loafers and moccasins, essentially, that are taking the place. These are comfortable shoes, but they're not the technical sneakers we're used to seeing. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that even for younger markets, to include things in the ranges that aren't just driven by that sort of streetwear culture. We can look at this sort of on a spectrum ranging commercial to conceptual. A lot of these ideas, depending on your market, can shift around slightly, but the innovative minimalist is going to be one of the more directional minimalist sort of looks. It's a bit sophisticated and futuristic, and therefore challenging to someone who may not be willing to go there. The comfort seeker, the urban gardener, and the psychedelic for different markets all sort of represent a similar space as far as the commerciality of it. And then in the middle, you sort of have slightly more youth culture, subculture driven ideas around the hedonist, the country clubber, and the fidgetalist, which will appeal to a slightly smaller group of people, but still have appeal across multiple markets, and it can still be very successful at retail. And so,
yeah, no, I was going to wrap it up here before we head over to women's. Just a review very quickly, this trend checklist, boiling things down to the 4 big ideas here. One, definitely as we emerge from the pandemic, these emotions, particularly in how customers and consumers think at the point of sale, will remain a key driver and top of mind. Second, the idea of performance qualities that Noah really hit upon multiple times throughout this presentation will continue to be a must-have and not a nice-to-have. Third, these value-conscious customers and consumers are definitely responding to a buy better mentality that is definitely shining through on most all the trends. And then finally, this idea that functionality is definitely an important key here. This is particularly easy to implement as most men's styles definitely relate back to some sort of historical utility garment, whether that's military supply, denim, athletic garments, etc. So with that, I'm going to kick it now over to Sarah, who will be presenting Women's Contemporary, followed by Women's Trend.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all well. So I'm going to take you through the Women's Contemporary Trend Toolkit. I'll kick off with the consumer drivers. We essentially, to give you a bit of a snapshot of where we are at. There is quite a lot to unpack, but I'll sum up the key takeaways. Essentially, what we are looking at is how post-pandemic lifestyle shifts are going to have an effect on essentially the product that we want to buy. So one of which is particularly key is that our lives are a lot more flexible now. Work, home, and leisure time is increasingly blurred. And this is resulting in a more flexible approach to dressing as well. So, and of course, I've been rediscovering the joy in a slower pace of life. Sorry guys, we're just having a connection problem. Yes, in a slower pace of life, but also a reconnection with nature. So even though this is predominantly has been driven by the pandemic, and it feels quite now, actually this is very much here to stay, because the consumer has truly realized the physical and mental benefits of being in nature. And so aside from manifesting itself in an increase in outdoor apparel, actually the sentiment, this ode to nature, so we appreciate nature even more now, is also reflected in a higher demand for planet-friendly fabrics, natural dyes. So sustainability remains a priority for the consumer and, of course, a business imperative. According to List, we've actually seen searches including vintage, secondhand, or pre-owned, really increasing 84% since the start of the year. And then another big message for the season is comfort, of course. Comfort has been such a buzzword for the past year and a half. It's not going to go away. Let's clear that up. It's going to stay. We've grown so used to it. It's almost become an imperative. It's almost crucial. It's crucial now. But it's no longer about hoodies and joggers only. In fact, we all have a little bit of sweatpants fatigue, but instead it's very much embedded. It's that kind of comfort that, you know, from elasticated waists to more relaxed tailoring, but also as a consumer sentiment, so as nostalgia. We know that in times of uncertainty, we tend to go back to the familiar, so comfort food even. So that idea of comfort will carry on, but in its full spectrum, so from product all the way to consumer, in quite a holistic sort of sense. Now, with all that in mind, what does it all mean for product? And so because there is this duality of emotions, so there is still fear and uncertainty on one side, but also there is a lot of optimism and you know, that desire to wanting to go out again. And this duality will be reflected in the product ranges as well. So we'll see an increase. We'll see an increase for you know, dopamine dressing through mood-boosting color, tactile fabrics, bold patterns. But at the same time, as I was saying, comfort remains key, but it's more discreet. It's more embedded. And then there will be a big focus on attributes such as ease of wear and wearability as well. Hybrids are going to be very important. So high-low pieces. High-low pieces that can be dressed up and down, but also that have a cost per wear appeal. So cost per wear, so you know how many times you use the item, is something that the consumer will scrutinize more and more going forward. Now, moving on to the big ideas. We have, you know, now that we've framed the picture, we have the contest. Let's look at the big ideas and the kind of trend narratives coming out of all of this. The versatile worker. even though many will go back to the office, it's obvious that the scenario will be slightly different. And we're not going to go back exactly how it was. We've already seen companies downsize their offices and looking at consumer is going to work from home more. Obviously, it's not the same for everyone. Even within the US, there are certain states that are going back to the office a lot faster. But I think it's fair to say that the career wear market, the way we knew it, it's not going to be the same, and it's not going to look exactly the same as before. It's all about hybridization. So it's about taking categories such as the suit jacket, trousers, underwire bras, shirts, and essentially build comfort into them. That's what it's going to be about. It's going to be a balancing act between essentially the casualization of tailoring and the smartening of loungewear. It's that sweet spot. So in terms of items, statement shirts, wrap front jackets, oversized blazers, low maintenance materials, that essentially, are crease-free kind of fabrics. They are all going to be important. And for footwear, our footwear team has really been talking a lot about the career clog. So the clog that is kind of, it's really comfortable, but also looks quite good. Brian, I think you wanted to add something to this.
Yeah, just an observation in my own home, even watching my wife get dressed for work, dusting off some of the old work clothes from the closet and just thinking, wow.
So moving on to the comfort colorist. So here, texture and color take precedence over silhouette. It's a commercial color styling story. It offers a joyful sort of pick and mix of mild, of mid-tone brights, but also soft color with a restorative appeal. And this is also a very important story to explore botanical dyes. But also think about plush surfaces to really help create that sense of comfort and protection. Hemp, linen, bamboo, lyocell, they're all really important fabrics because they have cooling and antimicrobial properties as well. So it's comfort, but it's sassier. It's more put together. It's got this very joyful aesthetic. And some brands are doing this really well. Rust the brand, or Paloma Wool, Ruyo Facial as well. And moving on to the third big message, key ideas, is the freedom chaser. So, here is, the title is pretty self-explanatory, right? It taps into the consumer mood of wanting to go out and wanting to embrace the summer spirit again. But coral, but again, offset against olive oil, for example. So it's bright, but they're still considered. They have that longevity. Vaquet ready silhouettes, like the resort maxi dress, really important, but also joyful prints, hand-painted motifs, bright checks, new waves. So again, think about designers like Versace or Super Yaya, and artisanal textures is very, very key for this direction. And then moving on to the next one, we have the seaside traveler. And here we have a really nice commercial trend. It's a nice update to nautical. It takes the nautical trend, but it's about introducing more rustic fabrics, raw textures, braided and macrame details, fisherman sandals. So again, artisanal elements are the focal point here, but also lightweight layering. And we are seeing this direction coming through really, really strongly across the latest collections, the pre-summer collection as well, like Gabriella Hearst or Chloe or Eden Choi. We then have the extravagant customer. So I'll go back to that. Here is very much that kind of go big or go home mentality. So we have been cooped up at home wearing sweatpants and probably not feeling that great. So there is certainly a big desire to go all out. This is taking party wear up a notch, but there is definitely that desire. Optimism is a massive message out there. That desire to celebrate is everywhere. So think about voluminous silhouettes, statement accessories, a lot of textural interest, very much led by designers like Christopher John Rogers. Now, I don't want to be a killjoy, right? But with my commercial head on, I'd say that it's really crucial to remember not to take things too literally. So, because the reality is, yes, there is this desire. However, party and occasion is no longer the volume category that it once was. And not just because our lifestyles have changed, but also for wider implications. Obviously, that single-use mentality doesn't resonate as much anymore. So in terms of buying, keep your volumes quite small, keep your numbers quite small. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to this.
Sarah, I hope you can hear me this time. It seemed like last time you couldn't.
Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one, which is soft romantic. And this is another direction for that kind of celebratory mood, but it's a lot more discreet. And when it gets to occasion wear, we will see less focus on big events, and we are going to pivot to smaller, more casual gatherings instead. So styles that have that femininity, that kind of soft elegance, but also retain ease of wear will be really important. Soft pastels, discreet florals, vintage blouses, anything that will work really well for kind of garden parties, but also for day wear occasions. So that day occasion is actually a key opportunity to look into. And moving on to the must-haves, this is quite a rich slide, but you can see how everything is mapped. So elastic details, what I would say, you can see here is quite self-explanatory, but I will just call out a few. Elastic details for dresses, very much tapping into that hybrid level that I talked about. It's the all-occasion dress. It's an item that you can wear in different occasions. So that's really key. The bodycon dress, after seasons really focusing on volume, we are seeing a return to a more form-fitting silhouette. Actually, they grew 131% across the autumn-winter 22 catwalks. For accessories, we have the scrunch bag. It's a really great example of a supercharged basic. So, you take a simple silhouette and update it with a detail that becomes almost like a statement. And then the everyday mule. So again, that's the perfect balance between comfort and a more put together aesthetic. So looking at how these big ideas translate and look at the spectrum, ranging from like commercial to conceptual, you can see how we start from the seaside traveler. So that's your nautical trend. That's really familiar. You have a customer that buys into that every year. And then the most conceptual is the extravagant consumer. So as I was telling you earlier, it's about, reintroducing it, tapping into that mood, but keeping numbers and volumes quite small. So yeah, just to recap very quickly, promote comfort-driven silhouettes, and this is across the board. It's not just for, it's for tailoring, but also for party wear. Inject optimism across styles. This is really important. We've had so many seasons of, sweatpants and beige and neutral colors. So that idea of bringing in color again and that dopamine dressing is going to be really important. Explore fabric manipulation. So again, it's the idea of elevated basic. It's the idea of like, how can you take a familiar silhouette and make it feel new again via fabric manipulation? And comfort will drive emotional value as well. So as I was saying, comfort, when we talk about comfort, it's really in its true full spectrum. So how comfort makes us feel as well. And now moving on to the women's trend toolkit. Again, I'm going to start with the consumer drivers. When it comes to the consumer drivers, particularly for the younger consumer, emotions play a very big part in their purchase decisions. According to Deloitte, 80% of decisions are based on emotions when choosing a favorite apparel brand. And so that's huge. And right now, it's even more pronounced because our emotions are almost heightened. There's almost a roller coaster. So those emotional purchases, that idea of joyful self-expression are a key consideration to keep in mind. And it also goes hand in hand with the desire for a more individualistic, a less homogeneous look. Hence, we're seeing the rise of craftcore, of dead stock design, of patchwork dresses. And this is also a consumer who is very conscious, is very concerned about climate change and overconsumption is general. So another important factor here is the idea of buying less but better, especially post-pandemic, where we are in a recessionary mindset. But of course, just from a design point of view, there is a real interest in recycled materials and just in general, a more circular approach. And the other important factor, which I've talked about already for women's contemporary, but it's comfort. Again, comfort, but revisited through a new lens. So it's really paramount for brands to really hit that sweet spot between comfort and that new desire to go out again and dress up, particularly for the younger demographic. A very good example of this is formal jersey wear. So corsets, for example, but made out of jersey. So you get the structure, but you don't compromise on the comfort factor. Bodycon silhouettes, mood-enhancing colors, but applied to more familiar shapes. So again, they feel new, but they retain that longevity. So items that can flex their commercial muscles and work across different occasions. And in terms of trend narrative, of course, this is all super key. And alongside the interest in craft, as I was saying, the renewed interest in vintage is key, and also the outdoors. We touched on the outdoors boom already. It's really happening, and it's set to carry on. And for the younger demographic, is actually set to mirror the same success that streetwear has had in previous seasons. So we went from having the hype beast to the hike beast. And that synergy between outdoors and fashion will be really key. So think just about how popular the Gucci by North Face collaboration was. And we're seeing a lot of brands following suit. It's also important to point out that many businesses are redesigning their services to prioritize outdoor space. So if we're going to socialize, dine, and party outdoors more, we'll need clothes and accessories that essentially cater for those new lifestyles. Now, looking at the big ideas for women's trends, the Explorer, so this renewed focus on the outdoors pushes consumers to really embrace a more modern twist on outdoor dressing. So in this Explorer story, we have shape-shifting outerwear, modular designs, clever details will be really, really key, as well as materials with properties, with benefits, so, like thermoregulating properties. So this is about taking outdoors-driven silhouettes, performance wear details, and updating them through a smarter, almost like a tech kind of lens. And the house partier is our next big idea for this cohort, is essentially looking at a new direction for party wear. It's much more rooted in comfort, but without losing the glam factor as well. And this is going to be very, very important. We're not talking about Zoom parties here. Yes, some of them will continue, but it's more about, that more comfort-driven approach to glamour, which will resonate as smaller and more casual gatherings will grow in importance. So as I was saying earlier, comfort corsets, bodycon dresses, slinky slip dresses, party slides and mules. Again, it's that idea of high-low dressing that will be really, really key. And moving on to our next big idea, we have the craftcore raver. This is essentially taking craftcore and evolving it into this party direction, which will be really, really key for festival. It keeps the kind of craftcore appeal, that kind of individualistic, one-off kind of look, but adds this psychedelic rave, festival-ready kind of layer. And it very much celebrates a playful, anything-goes approach to dressing up, really. So after having spent months at home experimenting with familiar clothes during lockdown, as well as experimenting with craft, we'll see oversized silhouettes, reclaimed materials, handcrafted trims, all really combined together to create this almost imperfect look, but it's actually really compelling. And to Gen Z, that imperfection is particularly important. And then we have the nostalgic resorter. So nostalgic references are really high on the agenda because the desire for nostalgia really prevails during uncertain times. But also, we have seen a real interest in vintage and secondhand. We're seeing more and more brands really, even at luxury, partnering with the likes of Depop, The Real Real. We also have films like the Wes Anderson latest movie coming out, Pixar's Luca, which is all set in 1960s Italian Riviera. So this sun-faded kind of pastel-toned look has a lot of commercial appeal. Vintage references are particularly key for resorts. So, think about resort shirts, souvenir tops, sun-faded checks, sun hats. This is a really big one for festival, but also for staycation. And this look that you can see here is quite refined, but you could take it into a more offbeat direction, almost like the kind of tourist core that we are seeing trending, depending on your consumer. And then we have the romantic gardener, which is a little bit of an update to cottagecore, but it's less twee, it's more universal, and it's more occasion wear focused. And it really strikes a balance between pretty details and functional practicality. So again, in terms of key items, romantic blouses, prairie dresses, but styled back with workwear boots and rustic accessories to create that interest, that visual contrast, essentially. And then our last big idea is, our last trend narrative is happy camper. So the focus on this our obsession with outdoor experiences continues, whether that's exploring a city on local walks, or it's very much, we've seen RV and camper van staycations really increasing, doorstep micro adventures. We have seen Google searches related to the topic of hiking, for example, like things like easy hikes near me, really growing a lot in the past year. So this story is really about reinventing outdoors wear, but for summer adventures with these mood-boosting colors. But also it's a really nice way to update your hard-working utility styles. Think about bright anoraks with a vintage 1980s, 1990s feel, repurposed polo tops, the adventure dress as well. So it's the idea of like something quite sporty, but again, it's got that pretty, that kind of feminine look to it. Cargo pants, and then again, styled back with performance sneakers and a lot of color blocking and recycled nylons, all really, really key to this trend. So looking at the must-haves, again, you can see some of them are really like the summer vest. It works into a lot of different trends. Some of the ones I would call out, for sure, the A-line, a flexi dress, again, is that hard-working piece which works across multiple categories, multiple occasions. The A-line mini, we are seeing mini shapes really making a comeback across for both skirts and dresses. And then crafted bags and sneakers, very much in line with the desire for a more individual kind of look, for these more imperfect pieces. And looking at the spectrum from commercial to conceptual, we have the romantic gardener, that's the most commercial direction, followed by the nostalgic resorter. You can really see how that can be done in kind of quite large volumes. But then when it gets to the more conceptual trends like the craftcore raver, this is where it's a little bit more for your statement, for your press pieces, for your statement pieces. So finally, just to recap, embrace versatile design, really, really important. And this is going to stay. This is going to stay, and this is across demographics. That idea of cost per wear, that idea of items that work harder for their money, it's very much here to stay, that you can wear in different occasions. Prioritize DIY and crafted styles. They really, truly resonate, particularly with the Gen Z consumer. And then design for emotion-based dressing. So that idea of emotions become really, really, really important. And then outdoor influences and functional fashion. So that synergy between fashion and outdoors wear is really, really paramount, and it's going to grow. So thank you so much, everyone. That's it from me. I think we're going to have a Q&A. So any questions, I'll be able to, myself and Noah will be able to take them. Thanks a lot.
And thank you, Sarah. We had some technical difficulties, but we made our way through with time to spare, a good 12 minutes. So we have tons of questions that came in, both narrow and broad-based. So I'm just going to jump right into it. The first one is for Noah and myself. I'll, of course, defer to Noah. So Noah, if we consider to dress a couple, so it sounds like a retailer or a brand who is dual gender for both men's and women's, is it a good idea to mix urban gardener and romantic gardener, or is it too much? So Noah, why don't you jump in on that one?
Yeah, this isn't a question that I can answer sort of with a blanket answer. The gardening trend, a lot of it is about lifestyle. So if it's authentic to the lifestyle of your consumer, then it would absolutely make sense to combine the aesthetics to appeal to both men's and women's markets. I think that's really the best way to look at it. If the gardening trend, at least on our end, is really about the soul searching and the mindful practice. It's a kind of a solitary thing, so it inherently has a kind of singleness to it. But there's no reason for couples not to sort of pair the two looks together and sort of make a larger statement out of it, especially if they do these activities together.
Yeah, I'm picturing the Biebers right now on their Instagram doing the his and her thing with the urban gardener and the romantic gardener. It could be visually over the top, specifically in a truly urban area. So if you're in a premier or secondary city in the United States, it could feel a little bit out of place. If it's right for your consumer, you'll know, I get the feeling. One point that I'd like to make is how great it is, both of these styles mixed and matched. So the idea of something like a pair of Crocs or something like a Patagonia short with a silk or rayon resort shirt, right? So to pull from maybe the hedonist for men. So mixing and matching is kind of a cool way to do this and not be too over the top. Would you say, Noah?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you said. I mean, nothing has to be done at wholesale. You can always borrow elements and sort of create what works for you and your consumer.
So with the next question, a general question about authentic leather. So can you address how authentic leather would become important? So trying to drill down a little bit deeper, I suspect the person writing this might be sort of thinking about how vegan leather and sustainable alternatives are trending right now. So Noah, are there any insights, or if Sarah has rejoined us, any insights on leather?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a huge uptick in leather alternatives. It's something on the WGSN site that we have a hashtag for, and it's trending. Mushroom-based leather has been picked up by some major designers, as well as some smaller markets and niche market designers who are looking for it. I think the real fundamental answer to the question comes down to the conversation around responsible fashion and our relationship to that, both as consumers and retailers and everything in between. And really what I've been saying for a while now is, at one point it was a point of differentiation to offer sustainable, ethical, responsible garments. And I think now it's almost an imperative. It's expected that your brand is making some sort of initiative to increase sustainability and responsibility and ethics in what you do. And that absolutely applies to any animal goods, and including leather.
Well said.
I second.
Oh, Sarah's back. Hello, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm back. Hello. Hi, guys. Hello, everyone. So yeah, no, I agree with that. I think with when it gets to vegan leather, you know, you need to be a bit careful because vegan can also mean obviously, you know, PVC and not necessarily the most sustainable. So when we talk, there has been a lot of development in that space. No, I mentioned mycelium leather, obviously, but also Pinetex, pineapple leather, kombucha leather, you know, at really premium points. But I think in general, yes, is the idea of like, if you're going to do vegan leather, it has to be done responsibly and it has to be vegan. Otherwise, authentic leather, as in like leather, there is an argument there that it lasts a lot longer, so therefore is inherently more sustainable. What I think the main problem is with leather is how it's treated in this process and the dyes. So that's the main problem around real leather. And this is where we are also seeing a lot of development and a lot of attention because, you know, it's been more about, you know, PVC versus leather, but actually it's more complex and more layered than that.
Very well put. And if you can own the narrative and the storytelling aspect of the sustainability behind, you know, a well-treated garment piece of leather that lasts you, as you said, Sarah, for 15 years, I think it's a really great storytelling opportunity for leather manufacturers and developers who might be on this call. Moving on to the next question, do you see any favorable trends for genderless clothing? So I'll field that very quickly from an Informa perspective because we actually have exciting developments within our company that addresses this somewhat. So for many people on the call, you probably know this, some of you do not, but the Project brand was once basically two brands. There was Project and Project Women's. Now we will be exhibiting Project Women's under the hero banner of Project, just Project, no mention of men's or women's, because we are seeing, one, more genderless clothing, but two, to accommodate our brands and our retailers who shop these brands, who buy men's and women's together. So we are definitely seeing it from an Informa perspective, and I would love to hear from WGSN as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can start, yes. I think this is a good example of something that started as a little bit of a trend. And, you know, it was back even in, I think it's 2013, and started as a trend. And now it's really moved out of that. It's not really a trend. It's a completely new category. It's a completely new direction. And it's one of those examples of, you know, it's really reflecting what's going on in the world. So while in the past we saw some unisex or genderless collections that, let's be honest, they were just a T-shirt, a white T-shirt, for example. So of course it would work on both. I think now more and more, especially a lot of new designers from across all regions, we're seeing a lot of really interesting African designers really tapping into that genderless aesthetic, but also like, not necessarily thinking about who you're designing for, but just thinking about, you know, like what the purpose of the garment is. So it's certainly an area that is growing a lot, but I wouldn't call it a trend necessarily. I think it's so big and it's so ingrained in what's happening in the world that actually it's you know, it's an expanding area. And also from a sustainability point of view, it just makes sense to use the same fabrics, the same pattern cutting, you know, if you can, to really maximize your you know, basically wastage, like to avoid wastage.
Yeah. I really see it as an extension of the ethics and responsibility conversation. You know, as our point of view as a people really starts to shift around the ideas of gender, and keep in mind, you know, in different parts of the world, gender's perceived differently. And if you're a brand or a retailer who has outposts in all these different regions, you have to consider that when you're doing it. I think it's less of a trend and it's more of a zeitgeist shift as a whole. You're seeing brands that, you know, okay, so for a long period, we saw a lot of brands that would say, we're making men's clothing with more feminine details, more lace, more beading, whatever. And you'd see women's brands doing their take on a men's suit, the whole kind of like, you know, Annie Hall look or whatever you want to say about that. And now I think the idea is less about gender inclusivity, and it's more about gender neutralness, creating clothing with, you know, both genders or no gender for that matter in mind. And seeing those types of things find a market is really interesting at the moment. And I really do see designers, it goes beyond gender, actually, because we're talking now about body types and body shapes. And you could take this idea of gender neutral clothing and figure out ways that you can expand that idea into the plus size market, into petite markets, and really create a range of clothing that fits a wide range of people or buy into that. And from a retailer's perspective, there's an opportunity here to create cohesiveness across your different categories. If you do kids, men's, women's, et cetera.
With about 2 minutes left, we have about 20 questions left in the chat. So I'm going to try to pick something that's most applicable to the now, which is heading into the August and September show cycles for projects, magic, and coterie. And this question is basically boiled down to one key bit, and that's, of the big ideas, which of them are going to reach max commerciality for buyers this season? So if you guys could pick one or two of your big ideas that you think are going to have the biggest impact commercially, this is your time.
Yeah, okay. So for me, the whole kind of versatile worker, that whole kind of work leisure, that idea, it's going to be a big one just for the contemporary consumer because, things are changing. We have this more flexible approach to life in general. So that is going to be a really big one. And the other one for me is the outdoors boom. And that is across categories, really. And I think it's for menswear as well. Kids wear as well, and in fact, there are a lot of opportunities for cross-generational design as well. So I think the outdoors boom, even for winter, so for both spring, summer, and winter collections, and work leisure, I would say that commercially they are the ones that are going to hit the most from a women's wear perspective.
Yeah, I don't think men's is that different. I think the comfort tutorialist is definitely going to be very commercial. It's, as I said in the presentation, it's a trend that sort of emerges from people who don't necessarily want to sacrifice the comfort they've become accustomed to as they reemerge into the world. So it's less about taking risk and it's more about maintaining comfort. So that's very approachable at a commercial level. And the other one that I would probably highlight, certainly the outdoors trend's continuing, but I think the hedonist is something to pay attention to right now. Really exploring that joyful expression, that idea of, action has a response, and that after being sort of in our COVID chrysalis, we're emerging, right? And we're becoming these, we want to be the butterfly. We want to be bright. We want to be loud. We want to be seen because we haven't been for so long. And I think, especially among younger markets, you're really going to see those bold colors, loud prints, big graphics having a lot of success.
Great, thank you, Noah. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sarah, for being here with us today and sharing this incredible trend direction. And thank you all for tuning in. As I mentioned at the beginning, a recording of this presentation will be emailed to you in the next few days. In the meantime, we welcome any of our listeners who are retail buyers to register to shop any of our upcoming events this August in Las Vegas and New York in September to continue your trend discovery journey. And if you're a brand that's tuning in today, we welcome you to learn more about our events and consider applying to showcase your latest trends at our Las Vegas or New York markets. You can access the full calendar listing with more information at finefashionevents.com. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.